Okay, so today's review is going to go over just a basic overview of Photoshop, the layout, where certain things are, and also just some certain general ideas to think about with this menu. You're going to see a lot of these ideas in the other Adobe products as well. So we just kind of want to get an overview of how to think when we're looking at this stuff. Now, because you guys are going to be working in computer labs that reset every time, you're probably going to get this actually that comes up automatically. You may also get information messages about this is the new thing in Photoshop because you have a new profile that comes up every time you log into those computers. And so what happens is even if you say don't show this again, it's going to show up again, right? So you can kind of skip through those, click through those, and then you will get to something that looks like this. Most of these programs will open asking you what type of file would you like to open, because in order to use anything in here we actually have to have a file open. If you're on your own computer, you will have a bunch of recent stuff. So you can see I have a couple things here I've worked on in the past. Otherwise, we've got different presets. So these are all, if you're working in photo versus print versus film and video, there are different presets. And we'll get into what all these technical things are. Doesn't matter what we open, so we're just going to open the first thing where it says on photo. I'm going to say create, because kind of doesn't matter what size thing we're looking at right here. We just want to have a space to work in so that we can actually see all of the tools and selections and things like that. Now, another thing before we actually get into the toolbar, which is this thing on the left-hand side, and it usually is, all of you might have different setups depending on the lab that you're in. Depends on what it defaults to. When you are in any of these programs, if you go to Window, you can go to Workspace. The Workspace defines where all of these panels are. So this is a panel here, this is a panel here. These are hidden panels, these little buttons, and you can click on them and they bring them out, and you click on this arrow and it pushes it back in. Information up here, a tool panel here. So these panels can be laid out in a certain manner, and that manner is also known as a workspace. And there are different setups. And so if I click on 3D, I get the things that Photoshop thinks I would use in a 3D setting. Or if I go to photography, it gets the things that Photoshop thinks I would use in a photography setting. So photography is, I think, a good place to start. It should have most of the tools that you would want to use, and it does have the layers you want to use. So if you're looking to have your set of tools look like mine, Window, Workspace, Photography is a good place to start. All right, so when we do that, we've got this big white space here, and then this darker area here. So the white space is your actual work area. This is if you were to print or to export or to anything like that. That is where the art would be. The rest of this is what's known as an artboard. In Photoshop, we don't actually see what's on there, but if you push things off the edge, they will exist. Toolbar is on the left-hand side, as I said before. These are all the things that do things. They do actions, depending on what they are, and they're vaguely sorted into tools that move things, tools that make marks, tools that alter marks, and then other various things. And then the options for all of your tools will be in the top here. So if I change what tool I have selected, let's say if I go to a paintbrush, I will have all of my options here for the paintbrush. For example, I can click on this and change the size. See, it's a little bit better. It was up here before, well, it was way higher than actually. All right, shapes, all sorts of things. So all of your properties for your tools, all of your options for your tools will be here. Now, all of these tools for making a mark, such as the paintbrush, I can just click and drag and draw. So Photoshop is the most intuitive of the programs because it's one of the only ones where you just kind of point and click and make pictures. So you can, there you go. It's a little bit more like real life than the other ones. There is also a tool called the eraser. And if I make that bigger, it acts like an eraser. There you have it. So if you wanted to move things, your top tool is your move tool. Oh, a background layer just means it's locked. So I can say convert to normal layer and it'll let me do this. Now you can see, actually, this is fun. For some reason, when we open something in Photoshop, it defaults to a white background. You can change it in your properties if it's your own computer, but the lab computers are not going to remember that. So if you want to have a transparent background, that's what this is. This crazy checkerboard setting is Photoshop's way of saying there is nothing there. That's different than white, right? This, there's a thing there. This, there's nothing there. So if you want to be able to draw where you can move whatever you're drawing around without worrying about the background, if I undo, you actually need to first unlock your background. And that's something we'll have to be reminded of over and over because, again, you can't change the settings. And then if I do that, I can actually erase that white or select it and delete it, right? I can get rid of what was originally that background. And now when I draw, right, I can take, I didn't have to drag select it. I take my little smiley face and I can move it wherever I want. Right? So this is the advantage that Photoshop has over, say, pencil and paper. It is much like a pencil and paper in that you can draw, right, just by clicking and dragging. And if you have a tablet, it's even more like a pencil and paper. But one of the options is to move things independently of one another. I can resize them. So I can make Mr. Frowny Face much different size. Now I have them both selected, but I can still separate them out. So there's a lot of separation that can happen in this digital space that can't happen with your pencil and paper. So that's one of the reasons we use a program like this. Another reason is you saw me undoing before. Everything magically went back to where I was. This is under Edit, Undo Move, which would put it back there, Edit, or step backwards actually in Photoshop. And you can keep stepping backwards and stepping backwards quite a long ways. You'd have to make a lot of moves in order for Photoshop to not remember any further back. As long as the program has been open and you haven't closed the particular file, you can keep stepping backwards. Now I was using a hotkey, which is Control-Alt-Z. All right, and then let's look here, Shift-Z. We'll go forwards again. But that's something you also don't have. It's like a perfect eraser that can also erase the fact that you resized something or move something back and forth. It can undo that. It's one of the most powerful tools you're going to have in your toolbox. One of the other most powerful tools that is powerful in that if you forget to do it, it's very terrible, is saving. So when we created this file, all right, see how it's called Untitled-1? That's Photoshop's way of saying you haven't saved this yet. It exists in the RAM of the computer. The RAM is the sort of running memory of the computer. As soon as I close down Photoshop, this poof vanishes. So I have to go File, Save, and because it's the first time I'm saving it, it's asking me, where do I want to put it? What do I want to call it? And so I'll go to my NVCC folder and I'll go to .101 because that's what I'm working on, and I will call this, I don't know, Photoshop Doodle, and I will try to spell doodle correctly, and I won't have any spaces and I won't have any funny characters, and I will use a capital letter to separate the two words, and I will say save. And now from here on out, when I make changes and I go File, Save, it doesn't ask me because it now has a place to put it that's on the storage drive, right? Now it has a place to put it that is actually being stored on a hard drive somewhere buried because I have a lot of files. There we go. And now it says Photoshop Doodle. All right, so saving files, which can also be done with, if I make another change, you can see a little asterisk that appears up here. That means you haven't saved it since you did a thing. Control S. Control S is the first hotkey you should learn, the second one being Control Z. But Control S will let you save really quickly. No excuses for not having saved your work, although it will happen. That is life with computer art. Another thing to keep in mind, and we'll be going over this a lot as the semester goes on, you can see I have a few different files in here. And this one is something.psd. And Windows tells me that's a Photoshop image. Let's expand this out a little bit. Alright, it's a Photoshop image. 16-bit, I think that's what's referring to. As opposed to something that is .jpeg or .any of these other things that we have. So what's happening is that we have to deal with extensions now. Usually, if you've been dealing with files, if you're old school like me, you might have .mp3. If you have videos, you might have .mp4, .html for web. But these extensions are now going to be very, very meaningful. So when you're saving, I'll bring up that save dialog again. Right, the type of file you choose will determine what the extension is. Don't worry, we won't use most of these, we'll only use a couple. But you are going to have to start paying attention to what type of file you save as. Because here we have a transparent background, I can select things. Second tool down, by the way, Marquee Tool, that's what's letting me select things. And when I go to the Move tool, I can then only move this. But if I save this, as instead of a PSD, if I save it as a JPEG, what I will have is a flattened image file. There we go. And see, Windows can preview it, Windows can look at it, and I can't open it in Photoshop, I can open it in a lot of places. But see the difference? This is now, even if I unlock the layer, it's all flattened. JPEGs can't have layers. PSD files can. So this is something you guys are going to have to look at and consider as you're saving your files. Alright, so toolbar on the left-hand side, properties for all of your tools on the top here, they will change as you change what tool you're on. Other various panels that we will get to later, layers panel, which we will get really into later. And you have your menu up top. And things to consider is that your window and then workspace, you may need to change it to match what you are familiar with. Or if something vanishes, you can always bring it up here, a specific panel. And under edit is where you will find step backwards and step forwards. And file is where you will find your save dialogues, your save as dialog, close, open, new, all that stuff. One last thing in the overview, you can open, we don't need that. Like I said, you can open a JPEG or other image files in Photoshop. You can go File, Open, and navigate to where it is. Or if you are in the browser, you can right-click, Open With, and maybe choose the program you want. If the lab has been updated, you should be able to choose from a variety of things. If it has not, then this might be broken. And it depends on if it's set up for you at your house or not, like depending on what computer you're using. So keep in mind that you may have to start from within Photoshop to open things. If I double click on a JPEG, it opens it up in the preview, which is typical. That's what it's supposed to do with a JPEG. All right. And one last thing actually about files. So I'm going to say this a lot too. The computers that you are working on are not your own. They're in the lab and they reset the storage drive, if I'm not mistaken, resets every time you log off. Some people say it's at midnight. I don't trust that. So you really need to save your files to a place that you can use. So if I go to, nope, there we go. If I go to the web, one place you can use as a backup for your backup for simple files, I don't recommend it a lot, but you can use Google Drive. for simple image files, for things like that, all you have to do is open up Google Drive on your browser, drag and drop, and it'll tell you it's uploading, and as long as it's not a big file, it'll upload pretty quickly. Make sure this is done before you go anywhere. And there's my JPEG. There's my doodle. If you're working with folders that have file structures, something more complex, do not rely on this. If you are uncomfortable with moving files around between a browser and a computer, do not rely on this. This is a little bit more complicated. It's very easy to get to, but you have to know how files work. If that is a problem, then you have to use a flash drive or an external drive. So that means navigating your computer. Now, I have a much more complicated file system than you're going to have on the computers in the lab, but if, where is it? 101. If my file is here and I need to get it on this drive, right? When you plug in a drive, it's going to show up here under computer, and it's going to be one of the new ones. Right click, copy. Don't drag and drop. Do not send to, don't do any of those things. Copy the file, go to where you want to put it, right click, paste. All right, I don't want to mess up my backup drive, so I'm not going to put it here. But don't drag and drop. That is unreliable with large files. Things can go wrong. Also, I have noticed people in the past, let me go back, doing something called send to, and they're sending it to that drive, or they're sending it to the desktop. See how it says create shortcut? Don't do that. If you create a shortcut, what you will have is not the actual file. You will have, I don't even know where it is. Shortcut. You will have a link that goes to the file, which means you don't have your file, which means you lost your file, which means you lost your work. So always copy and paste your files, or keep them on your flash drive in the first place and don't put them on the desktop in the first place. You're going to need to really be aware of where your files are for this class and for all future classes in the DAP program. All right, so those are the basics of Photoshop and computer file saving, and we'll have much more on Photoshop in the next video.